Hi, you. It's me, Nicole Phoenix Star, and this is the NikStarr podcast. Wow, have I got a story to tell you today? It's fascinating how extraordinary life is. So, a few days ago, I was thinking about some of the crazy wild stories that I have and have told my students about different seasons in my life and specific wild story NikStarr stuff. And a couple of days ago, so it was a few days ago, and then a couple of days ago, I um was kind of going through some, and I thought, okay, I'm going to start with like the oldest story I have, and it's because it started when I was born. And then yesterday had I was going on a walk and I had this whole like really strong energetic experience and intricate details that of this story, and had this real like presence. It was really powerful, and I was like, okay, well, that's a clear sign, so that's where we're going. And anyway, so that's a bit of the backstory about how this story came about, and just letting you know that I'm actually laying down recording this because my body's really tired, and I was sitting at my computer earlier and I'm like, oh my God, I need to go lay down. I feel really wiped out, and I'm like, I'll just lay down for a while and I'll record. And I'm like, actually, I feel up to recording, so I will do it at the same time. Anyway, so those that have been in my world for some time would have heard of my oldest friend, Tim. And that's who I'm talking about today. So Tim used to live 3 houses up from me, from where I lived from when I was born until I was in year 5. And Tim was just this out of the ordinary kid that was 3 years older than me. No. Yes, he was 3 years older than me. And apparently he came down to see me when I came back from the hospital with his mum and Biggs and little sister, who was, I guess, 1 at the time. Anyway, and so during my childhood, I, because then they had a boy who was around the same age as me as well. So those 3 kids. And as a 70s kid, we used to play with the neighbors and run between houses and, ride bikes. And when the street lights came on, you went home and all of those things. And I don't know, he was so fascinating. He was so unusual. And as he got older, he started doing ballet. And he was a beautiful ballet dancer. He had red hair and he was quite effeminate. Anyway, he was just this extraordinary kid that was so different to all the other kids that I knew and went to school with. when I was a little bit older, I found out that he was actually adopted, and so was his sister, and then they finally had a child of their own who was the third child. Um, yeah, I think he was the first person I ever knew that was adopted as well, and I remember a couple of times I went to pick him up from ballet school with his mum because, that's the kind of thing you did back then. And I remember watching him and these ballerinas and just thinking, wow, just his discipline, like he just, yeah, was so good at it, and his discipline, and all the other boys I knew were out playing football and playing cricket and all of that. And there was this like brave, 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 brave man, boy that did ballet and worked really hard at it. And, you know, obviously back then copped a bit of flack from the other boys and just kind of, and, being a redhead as well, like kids were brutal. There wasn't the level of dealing or awareness around bullying or that there is today. Anyway, he did that all through high school, and then I don't know. So then, yeah, right, just getting the timeline. He then, when he finished school, he went off to Sydney to study because eventually he became a English teacher for other languages, and he ended up being able to speak 6 different languages or something. He was extraordinary at Spanish, and he, yeah, taught English in foreign countries a lot. So he went to Sydney to study to become a teacher, but also, yeah, a whole foreign language situation. And when he was in Sydney, he started exploring deeply the queer scene and the gay scene, which was like, I guess, at the height of like when AIDS was really full on and before they had medication that could, make it something. And so, it was really kind of risque because AIDS was a death sentence back then, where it isn't now. Anyway, during that time, he also started experimenting with drugs and became a heroin addict and whatnot. And then eventually he got himself clean and came back to our country town where we grew up in country New South Wales. And I'd finished school and I was working at a hotel, and I was doing a modeling shoot for that hotel because I used to do modeling and other things. Anyway, and I met him again at this shoot, and I was like, "Oh my God, childhood friend!" And we reconnected, and it was just wild hearing about his stories. And we used to go out for these dinners, and um, he was working at this really cool cafe, and I used to go in and sit with and hang out with him on his breaks, and we'd, you know, smoke cigarettes and I don't think he was drinking then either. That's why we're having coffee dates, not drinking dates. Anyway, and yeah, we just reconnected for the first time as kind of adults and just had this whole season of fun, of, kind of non country kid having lived on the edges and known each other our whole life, resonance thing. And then he actually went to South America, to Colombia, to teach. And again, I lost contact with him. There was no Facebook. There's no internet, actually. And he did several stints in Colombia and other South American countries where he had all of these crazy experiences with all these beautiful South American men, and dabbled in Colombian sugar, but never became like a full-blown addict again. Anyway, and then by that, I didn't see him for years and years. And then I was 33, 34, and I had a very what do you say? A very eclectic boyfriend who lived in Brisbane. And one day he said to me, "Oh, I've got a new flatmate moving in. He's actually from Wagga. Maybe you know him." And I'm like, as if I know him. Do you know how many people live in that city where we both grew up? And he said, "Well, maybe you do. His name's Timothy Weeks." And I went, "Oh my God, know him." I've known him since I was born, and I know him like, wow. Anyway, so I went down whenever the next kid-free day was, and I walked in and there he was, and I'm like, oh my God. And he's like, what are the coincidence? What is the chances? What is, like, there are no coincidences, like, wild. And I'm like, oh my God. And that night we cooked this big, massive dinner and had this extremely long conversation about ripping basil over cutting basil. And it was just because a few days ago I was ripping basil in my kitchen and I was thinking about him. It was like these little things that just kept popping up over the last few days. Like, just I was ripping basil and I'm like, oh, I remember when Tim and I had that crazy thing with when he became Douglas's flatmate. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, right. I haven't heard from him for a while. It's been a minute. Maybe there's going to be a convergence. I could just feel the energy. And that was one of the first things that happened about a week ago. Anyway, and then I yeah, so we had a few crazy wild nights, as was the season of my life back then. And eventually, after a few months, Douglas decided to move in with me, and Tim had gotten another job back in South America, and he was heading back for another contract. Anyway, so off he went again, and then by this time, obviously there was Facebook and whatnot, and we just had random chats occasionally about, adventures and catching up and whatever. They weren't like weekly or anything. They were just random pop-ins. And then I moved to Bali, and then about a year after I moved to Bali, he messaged me and said he got a contract in East Timor, and he was going to East Timor, and maybe one day we could catch up, considering we were both living in Indonesia. And I said, well, that's really interesting. I am doing some support work with an Indonesian company, and I have to go and do a site inspection. So many people don't realize that although I was on a crazy spiritual journey, there were so many other things going on as well. And one of those was supporting an Indonesian company with my time and energy and English pronunciations. I used to write all their content and their website and their all this stuff because their staff didn't have excellent English grammar skills, and their company was doing a big build out in East Timor, and I was being taken over, and I'm like, I'm going to be in East Timor next week. And he goes, I arrive in 2 days. We should catch up. Anyway, and I went over to East Timor, and this big, beautiful old colonial building was being transformed into a hotel, and it was such a fun adventure. And I caught up with him for lunch, and he was working actually for maybe the Australian Defence Force or even the American Defence Force as an English teacher on a base somewhere in East Timor. And yeah, we just laughed at how the diversity of our convergences over time, and it was just lots of fun and funny, and how we just had these parallel crossovers, and it was just, I don't know, it was just such a kindred spirit thing. Just always living on the edges of random, crazy life and being able to relate and have empathy and always with zero judgment. And I don't know, a very deep, unconditional friendship. Anyway, and then he organized this big birthday for his 40th in a villa in Bali. And we went and hung out for a few days. There was a few of us actually. And did his big 40th soiree. Again, lots of fun. And then, I don't know, like maybe a year later or less, I don't know, he came over for a week on his days off, and we went on this crazy adventure. Um, yeah, we found some gay clubs in Bali, underground gay clubs, and I was in this like wild awakening, and there was just all this energy, and I started to go into trance. It was hectic, and this beautiful barman saw me, and it was just such a crossover of my life. And just, yeah, came and held my hand, and we scented, and it was just funny. Anyway, yeah, we just ran amok and enjoyed everything and ate lots of Western food because he wasn't able to get it in East Timor, and went out to beautiful dinners at the really high-end restaurants in Bali, and ate pizzas and got all his fix on that. And then he went back to East Timor, and I don't know how much longer later than that. And then he got a job in Afghanistan, and he was in real two minds about going, and he talked to me about this pull and always wanting to go to Afghanistan, and how his grandmother that he loved used to have this Afghanistan carpet on her wall growing up, and how it was always like this extreme impact on him, and he always had this huge pull to Afghanistan, which was kind of random considering his growing up and his life and stuff. Anyway, he said he felt like he had to go. And I'm like, well, of course you've got to go, darling. Anyway, so we chatted quite a lot during that time. and he popped into Bali on his way, but I didn't actually see him because I don't know, I was somewhere remote doing some rite of passage initiation ism, and weren't able to catch up, which was fun. And anyway, he chatted a lot on his way to Afghanistan and on arriving, and how, I don't know, he just wanted to share this really exciting time in his life. Anyway, day 2, I'm chatting to him, and he was in a vehicle going from the university to the embassy or something. And he's like, "Oh my God, I can't talk anymore. I think we're getting carjacked." And I was like, "Oh my God, serious? Well, let me know if you're okay." And I didn't hear back from him for 4 months. When I didn't hear back from him, but I got news that he'd been taken by the Taliban, that he was with another teacher, an American teacher, and those two were taken by the Taliban and held captive for 3.5 years. And they would release random videos of Tim and the American pleading with the Australian Prime Minister and to the American president to plea with the Taliban for their release. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so extreme in our story. Anyway, after 3.5 years, eventually they were released as in a exchange program where some Taliban that were held, that were in jail in the US, were swapped for Tim and the American guy. And so they were taken out of Afghanistan, and they spent 6 weeks in Germany, in hospital recovering. And then Tim was brought back to Australia and did press release and all of this stuff. Anyway, I messaged him. I'm like, yo. He's like, oh my God, it's been a minute. He goes, do you realize that you were the last person I spoke to before I went to captive? I'm like, well, I guess so. Yeah. And he said, oh my God. And I said, and we talked and talked. And he explained to me that they were chained to each other most of the time, and just told me all these details and stuff. And then he said to me that he had actually kind of became friends with some of the guards because he'd watched them pray to Allah 5 times a day and watched them kind of like through their faith, and became curious because he was able to speak to them because he spoke all these language, and he actually learnt their dialect, and they taught him how to speak it through the Quran. And so he started like learning all about like the beautiful philosophy of Islam, which wasn't, I don't know, like he said, the Taliban are trying, he said it's really hard to explain, but like, obviously their means and their ways crazy, but fundamentally underneath, like, they're trying to do the Quran through the filters of their conditioning and this culture and all of this, and there's this just really beautiful part of these humans that also have this other part that, is portrayed and all of this stuff. And he goes, I really am into the Islamic faith. And I'm like, whoa, that is crazy. And he's like, yeah, I know. It's the last thing I would have ever thought about. Anyway, so he kind of recovered, and I said, you need to write a book. And he goes, I've had so many people contact me about movie deals and all of that. He goes, I just need to breathe fresh air. And I went, yeah, fair enough. And then I don't know, I spoke to him about a month after that, and he's like, I've just got so many reporters and stuff. And he goes, I'm just going to go and take a sabbatical from everyone and everything and kind of shut down my Facebook for a while and not talk to anyone because I just need to kind of be with me. And I went, yeah, I totally get that. And in that time, he started, really practicing Islamic religion and his faith, which I totally understand is someone who, and I'm like, I totally understand that. Me becoming a Hindu high priestess and me becoming a Hindu in my journey, I would never, ever understand. I would never, ever have thought that would have been my reality. And so I have, like, again, a parallel, deep, deep understanding what it's like to go on this extreme trajectory that you could never, ever imagine if, like, it's always been our way. And then about a month after that, he got diagnosed with cancer in the brain. And I was like, wow, wild. And then he kind of went into remission a little bit, but eventually he decided that he wanted to go full Muslim and move back to Afghanistan. And he was able to get a job back teaching English at the University of Kabul. And he fostered these relationships with the Taliban in trying to become a bridge and to assist in peace. Like, his whole goal was that. And he actually became really good friends with the leader of the exchange, senior member of the Taliban, and that exchanged him at the time of the prisoner exchange. And they went on this big pilgrimage through Afghanistan for him to learn more. And he was actually an advocate to try and get women back into schools and for women's education. And he was the bridge for the Taliban to be able to bring that back to the Afghanistani women's. Anyway, he's been swirling around for days, and yesterday I could just feel his presence, and I came and I'd just been nonstop thinking about him. And then this morning I opened up Google and I said, Timothy Weeks dies of cancer. And I was like, oh my gosh. Of course. Not of course, but not surprising. And I just felt there was just another convergence, and it wasn't going to be via Facebook or person or conversation, but it was a completion. And that is episode 1 of the crazy NikStarr stories, and how I don't believe that anything is a random coincidence and everything has a purpose. And soul contracts are wild, and dancing on the edges is my favorite place to be. And Timothy is someone that I've danced for my whole entire life, and I am eternally grateful for him. And that is the end of my podcast today. Thank you so much for listening. I am so grateful. My website is www.nikstarr.com, NIKSTARR. Much love. Mwah.